Into the depths, the man who listened to the unconscious, soft music fades in low strings. Gentle piano narrator, VO, before the age of social media and neuroscience. Before mental health became a buzzword, there was a man who tried to map the human soul itself. His name was Carl Gustav Jung, psychiatrist, philosopher, mystic, scientist, and perhaps the last true explorer of the inner world. Most people know Jung through popular fragments, the shadow, dreams, archetypes, and the collective unconscious. But few understand the full story. Jung didn't invent psychology. He expanded it into a mirror for humanity. What he discovered went far beyond therapy rooms. It touched mythology, religion, dreams, and the very structure of consciousness. Tonight, we're not just revisiting his theories, we're entering his mind. This is the hidden story of Carl Jung, and what he uncovered about the human mind itself. Act I, the breakaway from Freud. It begins in Zurich, Switzerland, early 1900s. The world of psychiatry is still young, mechanical, rigid, obsessed with diagnosing what's wrong in the human brain. And in Vienna, a rising figure dominates the field, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. When Jung, a brilliant young psychiatrist, meets Freud in 1907, something electric happens. The two men talk for over 13 hours straight on their first meeting. Freud sees in Jung not just a student but a successor. Jung sees in Freud a father figure, the man who opened the forbidden doors of the unconscious, but every alliance in psychology begins with agreement and ends in rebellion. For Freud, the unconscious was a basement, filled with repressed desires, fears, and sexuality. For Jung, it was something deeper, a vast ocean of symbols, wisdom, and ancient knowledge. Jung begins to ask dangerous questions. What if the unconscious isn't just personal? What if it's shared? What if our dreams don't just reflect trauma, but the soul's attempt to communicate? Freud calls this mysticism. Jung calls it truth. The friendship collapses in letters and silence. By 1913, the two men never speak again. Jung is left isolated, professionally exiled, emotionally shaken, spiritually unmoored, but it's in that darkness that his true work begins. Act 2, the descent. Europe is on the brink of war. But in Jung's private world, another war is raging, the one between reason and madness. He begins experiencing visions. Oceans of blood sweeping across the continent. Towers collapsing. Gods dying. At first he fears he's going insane. Later he'll call it a confrontation with the unconscious. Every night, Jung closes his eyes and steps into what he calls active imagination, a technique to let his mind unfold without control. What he records during this period will later become one of the strangest and most important books in modern psychology, the Red Book. Bound in crimson leather, filled with calligraphy and paintings. The Red Book is Jung's record of his journey through the psyche, his personal mythology. He meets archetypal figures, Philemon, Salome, the wise old man, the serpent, the hero. They speak in riddles, symbols, and visions. To the outside world, it looks like madness. To Jung, it's revelation. He's building what no psychologist has ever dared to, a map of the unconscious, not as a disorder, but as a sacred landscape. Act 3, the discovery of archetypes. From his inner descent comes his greatest discovery, archetypes, universal symbols that appear in myths, dreams, and religions across all cultures. The mother, the hero, the trickster, the shadow. These are not characters, they are patterns of the human mind. When you dream of falling, fighting, or searching, your mind is speaking in the language of archetypes. Jung realized that humanity shares a collective unconscious, a kind of shared memory bank of experiences and instincts. He writes, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul." This is not metaphor. For Jung, dreams are messages from the unconscious, symbols carrying information the conscious mind can't yet understand. He begins analyzing thousands of dreams, from patients, artists, mythologies, even ancient alchemy. Each time he finds the same recurring motifs. It's as if all humanity is dreaming together. This discovery changes everything, not just psychology, but philosophy, art, and culture. Painters like Salvador Dali, filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick, writers like Hermann Hesse all draw from Jung's ideas. Even modern cinema, from Star Wars to The Matrix, echoes his archetypes, the unconscious. Jung believed is not just beneath us, it's around us. We live inside its symbols. Every day. Act 4. The shadow appears, but Jung knew, you can't explore the light without confronting the dark. He called this inner darkness the shadow. The shadow is everything we refuse to see in ourselves, the anger, envy, desire, guilt, fear, all that we hide behind the mask of our persona. Jung warned that what we repress doesn't disappear. It waits, he said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is perhaps Jung's most haunting insight. That the real danger isn't what's in the world, but what's hidden within us. And when an entire society denies its shadow, when it represses fear, power, and rage, the collective unconscious will manifest it. Jung saw this happen firsthand. In the 1930s. He predicted that Europe's psychic tension would explode into collective madness, the rise of nationalism, fascism, and war. He saw Hitler not just as a political figure, but as an archetype, the embodiment of a nation's repressed shadow. His insight was chilling and prophetic. Act V, the meaning of the mind by the time World War II ends. Jung's theories have evolved into something larger than psychology. He no longer sees the human mind as a machine to fix, but as a mystery to understand. He teaches that the goal of life is not happiness, but individuation, the process of becoming whole, by uniting conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, reason and dream. Who looks outside? Dreams. Who looks inside? Awakens. That, he believed, is the journey of every human soul, to confront our own depths, to integrate our darkness, and to emerge not perfect, but complete. Narrator, VO. By the end of his life, Jung had become something rare, a scientist of the unseen. He mapped the invisible terrain between the mind and the myth. And though the modern world still races forward, chasing data, dopamine, and distraction, Jung's voice echoes like a whisper across time. Man needs the symbolic life. Only the symbolic life can express the needs of the soul. The world may have changed, but the human mind, the dreamer, the seeker, the shadow bearer remains the same, and that's what Jung discovered, that the greatest frontier isn't out there, it's within. The language of the unconscious, dreams, symbols, and the soul's mirror, soft ambient sound, heartbeat rhythm, faint echoes, a slow cello fades in. Narrator, VO. When we dream, we enter a world without logic, where time bends, faces shift, and emotions take form. To science, this is chaos. To Carl Jung, it was communication. He believed that every dream is a message, written in a language. The conscious mind has forgotten how to read. And the alphabet of that language is made of symbols. The symbol speaks to Jung. A symbol was not decoration. It was alive. He defined it simply: a symbol is the best possible expression for something we do not yet understand. Dreams, art, religion, mythology, they are all symbolic systems, attempts of the unconscious to speak to us. When you dream of flying, drowning, falling, being chased, it's not random. The unconscious doesn't speak English or French. It speaks the language of images, of emotion, of myth. Jung often said that if you want to understand yourself, you must first learn to interpret your own symbols. Because the unconscious will speak. The question is, are you listening? Act 2, the Red Book and the Map of Symbols. In the solitude of his Red Book years, Jung encountered figures and visions that would later become the foundation of his symbolic universe. One of the most important was Philemon, an old, wise figure with the wings of a kingfisher. Philemon, Jung wrote, represented superior insight, a kind of inner guide from the deeper layers of the psyche. He wasn't hallucinating. He was dialoguing. Jung treated these figures as autonomous parts of himself, yet independent, like dream characters that hold wisdom we cannot consciously access. To him, these weren't fantasies, they were archetypal presences, universal patterns that exist in every culture and every person. He realized the human mind has always told the same stories, gods descending into darkness, Heroes confronting monsters, death and rebirth, light and shadow. These myths were not just ancient entertainment. They were the psyche speaking to itself. Act 3, the collective unconsciousness, was Jung's great divergence from Freud. Freud's unconscious was a basement of repression, personal, filled with childhood trauma. Jung's unconscious was a cathedral collective, filled with the echoes of humanity itself. He called it the collective unconscious, a shared psychic structure containing archetypes, instincts, and symbolic forms inherited through evolution. Just as the human body shows a common anatomy, Jung wrote, so too does the human mind show a common psychic structure. That is why a child in Africa, a monk in Tibet, and a writer in New York can all dream of the same motifs: falling, fighting, seeking, dying, rebirthing. We are all dreaming versions of the same universal story. Act 4, the archetypes of the psyche. Jung identified several key archetypes that form the architecture of the human mind. The persona, the mask we wear in society, how we want to be seen; the shadow, our repressed self, what we hide or deny; the anima, animus, the inner feminine in man and the inner masculine in woman; the self, the center of the total personality; the unity of conscious and unconscious. Each of these archetypes plays a role in dreams, myths, and our behavior. Jung compared them to organs of the psyche, structures that evolve and function in symbolic ways. Just as physical organs do in the body, the more we deny them, the louder they become in dreams, the more we integrate them, the closer we come to wholeness. Act V, dreams as dialogue. Jung didn't believe dreams could be decoded like puzzles. He saw them as conversations between the conscious and the unconscious. For example, a man dreams he's drowning in the ocean. Freud might interpret this as sexual repression or childhood anxiety. Jung would ask, what does the ocean represent for you? For some, the ocean is chaos. For others, it's a source of life. The meaning is personal, but the symbol is universal. To Jung, every dream was like a film directed by the unconscious, each scene crafted with purpose. The goal was compensation, to balance the one-sidedness of our waking life. If you're too rational, your dreams will be emotional. If you're too emotional, your dreams will be rational. The psyche seeks balance. Act 6. The shadows return. Jung once said, in each of us, there's another whom we do not know. That other is the shadow. He believed the shadow is not evil by nature. It's simply what we refuse to acknowledge. And the more we repress it, the more power it gains. Dreams often reveal the shadow through frightening images, monsters, intruders, doubles, but Jung taught that the goal is not to destroy the shadow, but to befriend it, to see it as part of oneself, not an enemy. The person who does not face their shadow, Jung warned, risks projecting it onto others, seeing evil in the outside world that actually belongs within. He saw this projection play out in nations, religions, and wars. And in today's world, with online outrage, political polarization, and social fragmentation, Jung's insight feels prophetic. We're drowning in our collective shadow. Act 7. The anima and the sacred union. Beyond the shadow lies another profound discovery, the anima and animus. For Jung, the psyche of every person carries both masculine and feminine elements. The anima represents the inner feminine of a man, emotion, intuition, creativity, sensitivity. The animus represents the inner masculine of a woman, reason, strength, purpose, and direction. To become whole, we must integrate both. He called this process coniunctio, the sacred union of opposites. It wasn't about gender, it was about psychic completeness. Only by uniting these inner dualities, Jung said, can we transcend them. Act 8, alchemy and the soul's transformation by midlife. Jung turned to an ancient and surprising source for psychological insight, alchemy. He saw in the alchemist's work the transformation of base metal into gold, a metaphor for the transformation of the human soul, just as alchemists sought to turn lead into gold. Jung believed the psyche seeks to turn suffering into consciousness. Every depression, every loss, every failure, he saw them not as obstacles, but as materials for transformation. The lead of our pain becomes the gold of self-awareness, he wrote. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's alchemy of the soul, and it happens, often, through dreams. Act 9, Modern Science and the Mystery Modern. Neuroscience tries to explain dreams as random firings of neurons, a biological housekeeping function. But Jung would smile at that and ask, then why do they speak in symbols? The truth is, even with all our technology, we still don't understand why we dream. We can track brainwaves, but not meaning. We can map sleep cycles, but not symbols. And perhaps that's the point. Dreams aren't data to analyze. They're messages to experience. Jung's view of the unconscious was not mechanical, but sacred, a living field of meaning. He saw dreams as the whisperings of the spirit, a way for the inner world to remind us that life is more than logic. Act X. The hidden teaching by the 1940s. Jung's reputation had transformed from scientist to sage. His students came from every field, doctors, artists, theologians, philosophers, and they all left with the same revelation. The unconscious is not the enemy. It's the forgotten half of the soul. His hidden teaching was simple but radical. That what we call madness might sometimes be the soul's attempt to heal itself, to speak through symbols when words fail, he said. The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, only outgrown. Jung didn't promise happiness. He promised meaning. And in a world addicted to distraction, that may be the most revolutionary idea of all. Narrator, VO, dreams, shadows, symbols. To Jung, these were not superstitions. They were the hidden architecture of consciousness. Each of us, he believed, is both the dreamer and the dreamed, the actor and the stage. To understand the human mind. You don't just study neurons, you listen to the night, because somewhere in the flickering theater of sleep, your soul is still trying to speak. The awakening of the self-individuation and the future of consciousness. Sound design. Faint wind, soft choral hum, heartbeat echoing, then silence. Narrator, VO. Carl Jung spent his life decoding dreams, symbols, and the unseen forces that move the human soul. But in the final decades of his life, his search shifted from understanding the unconscious to becoming whole. He called this lifelong process individuation, the journey of integrating every part of ourselves into one living totality. It was not therapy. It was transformation. Act I, the call to wholeness for Jung. The greatest crisis of the modern world wasn't war or technology or politics. It was MEANINGLESSNESS. In a letter from 1945, just months after the horrors of World War II, he wrote, "Man cannot stand a meaningless life. When the soul is neglected, it cries out in the form of neurosis." The modern person, Jung believed, was spiritually homeless, disconnected from myth, ritual, and inner life. We had conquered nature, built machines, split the atom, but we'd lost contact with the inner world that gives existence purpose. And so, he proposed something radical. If the world is to change, the individual must awaken first. Act 2, individuation, the journey inward individuation. Jung said, is the process of becoming who you truly are, not who you think you are, or who the world tells you to be. It begins with confrontation, meeting your shadow, the parts of yourself you've exiled, listening to your dreams, the voice of your unconscious, integrating your anima or animus, the inner opposite, and moving toward the self, the central archetype of wholeness, the inner God-image. Jung often compared individuation to the hero's journey, like Odysseus returning home, or Buddha awakening beneath the Bodhi tree. It's not about escaping life, but descending into it through loss, confusion, and suffering until one finds meaning. He said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. To become whole, one must allow the contradictions within to coexist. Reason and emotion, masculine and feminine, light and shadow. It's not perfection that heals us, it's integration. Act 3, the self. The center of the psyche, the heart of Jung's psychology, stands a mysterious figure. The self, he described it as both the totality of the psyche and its guiding center, like the sun around which all planets of the mind orbit, The self appears in dreams and myths as symbols of unity, a mandala, a child, a divine figure, or a circle of light. To encounter the self is to realize that consciousness is not the ruler of the psyche. It's the guest. We do not possess the self. The self possesses us. When Jung was in his 70s, he had a near-death experience during a heart attack. He described floating high above the earth, seeing the planet as a glowing blue sphere suspended in the vastness of space. He said, "It was as if I was being released from the bondage of time and space. It was as if I was being released from the bondage of time and space. I felt an overwhelming unity with all things." But he also said he was pulled back because there was still work to do. That vision crystallized his understanding. The self isn't an idea. It's an experience of wholeness. A revelation that the human mind and the cosmos are reflections of the same. Mystery. Act 4. The God within Jung never rejected religion, but he redefined it. He didn't see God as a figure in the sky, but as an archetype within the psyche, the image of wholeness. He once wrote, "The decisive question for man is he related to something infinite or not? Only if we know that something is infinite can we avoid being devoured by the finite." Religion, he argued, had lost its symbolic power. People were clinging to literal beliefs while forgetting the psychological truth beneath them. He wanted to restore the inner experience of the sacred, the direct encounter with meaning through dreams, symbols, and the imagination. Jung's God was not a doctrine. It was a living mystery inside every human being. Act V. As science meets soul. As the 20th century advanced, psychology split. Freudians turned toward analysis and pathology. Behaviorists turned toward measurement and experiment. But Jung remained somewhere in between, a scientist of the soul. He spoke with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, co-creator of quantum mechanics, about how matter and mind might be two aspects of the same reality. Together, they explored what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that can't be explained by cause and effect. When a symbol from a dream appears the next day in waking life, Jung believed it wasn't random. It was a glimpse into the unity of psyche and cosmos. The psyche and matter, he said, are two different aspects of one and the same thing. Today, as neuroscience and physics begin to revisit consciousness as fundamental, Jung's intuition looks less mystical and more prophetic. Act by the wounded healer in mythology. There's a figure called the wounded healer, the one who heals others through their own pain. For Jung, this archetype was deeply personal. He had lived through visions, despair, and inner chaos. He knew what it meant to break and rebuild. He told his students, "Only the wounded physician heals." Jung believed that our wounds aren't obstacles, they are openings. They force us inward toward self-knowledge and compassion. In this sense, every person walking through pain is also walking the path of individuation. And the deeper you go, the more universal your experience becomes. Act 7. The modern condition. Jung's diagnosis of modern life feels even more urgent today. We live surrounded by stimulation, yet starving for meaning. We have knowledge, but little wisdom. Connection, but little depth. He foresaw this fragmentation. He said modern man is overpowered by his own mind, lost in rationality, cut off from nature and the unconscious. In his essay Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he warned that humanity's greatest danger wasn't physical extinction, it was psychic disconnection. When people lose touch with their inner world, the outer world fills with projection, ideology, and chaos. Sound familiar? Social media outrage, conspiracy thinking, identity as performance? All symptoms, Jung would say, of a collective psyche in crisis, a society that's forgotten how to dream. His remedy, not escape, but introspection. To turn inward, to reclaim our symbols, to listen again to the unconscious. Act 8. The future of consciousness. Jung's vision didn't end with psychology. It pointed toward evolution itself. He believed that consciousness is still developing, still unfolding through each generation. What dreams were for the ancients, he said, imagination is for the future. The next stage of human evolution won't be physical, it will be psychological. The world hangs on a thin thread, Jung once said. That thread is the human psyche. If individuals awaken, if we each confront our shadow, find our myth, and live symbolically, the collective can heal. But if we don't, the unconscious will find darker ways to express itself through conflict, fear, and destruction. He didn't see psychology as a luxury. He saw it as survival, actics, death, legacy, and the inner flame. Carl Jung died in 1961, at the age of 85, in his home on Lake Zurich. Outside, the lake was calm. Inside, his shelves overflowed with books, mandalas, paintings, and notes. The walls of his study were covered with symbols: circles, crosses, serpents, suns, the alphabet of the unconscious. He had spent a lifetime decoding. In his final writings, he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That line became his legacy, a message to future generations that meaning is not given, it is made. That inside each of us lies an undiscovered world, vast, ancient, and waiting to be explored. After his death, the Red Book, his secret journal of visions, remained locked away for decades. When it was finally published in 2009, scholars realized something astonishing. It wasn't just a record of a man's imagination. It was a map of the psyche, a psychological scripture. His words, once dismissed as mystical, are now studied by neuroscientists, artists, and philosophers alike. And across YouTube, podcasts, and social media, Jung's ideas are finding new life because they speak to the timeless hunger of the human soul. Act X. The eternal return, soft instrumental rises, piano and cello interweaving, narrator, VO. Carl Jung's hidden teaching was never just about psychology. It was about remembering what it means to be human. To dream, to wrestle with shadow, to discover meaning in suffering, and to realize that consciousness, your awareness, your story, is not an accident of biology. It's the universe waking up through you, he once said. In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder a secret order. If we can learn to see through symbols again, to read the language of the unconscious, then perhaps the human story isn't one of decline, but awakening. We are not the first generation to feel lost. But maybe we're the first to realize that the map was never outside us, it was drawn within. Long pause. The sound of waves. A deep breath. The world will ask you who you are, Jung said. And if you do not know, the world will tell you.